All right, and good morning, everybody. Sherman Ray, Black Success Magazine. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. Should say Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. All around America, we celebrate this each and every January, where we take the time out to honor arguably the greatest civil rights leader in our lifetime, definitely, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So we're going to talk today about some leadership principles that we can take from Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. And we're going to talk about some of the things that you can apply to your business and to your life as a result of the legacy that Martin Luther King left on this planet. Before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about Black Success Magazine. We're expanding, folks. It's continually expanding. The magazine is out. We actually launched our magazine in December, so you can go to our website at www.blacksuccessmagazine.com. You can check out our magazine on there. On that website, you'll also see videos and articles, all kinds of neat stuff that will actually inspire you. If you would like to, you can actually even get on our mailing list. Just send me an email at info@blacksuccessmagazine.com and you can get on our mailing list. So let's talk about some leadership principles we can get from Martin Luther King Jr. And many of you know, and I know this is a no-brainer, folks. Martin Luther King came to prominence on the March on Washington. Many of you may not know this. You probably heard the speech, the I Have a Dream speech. But Martin Luther King was not scheduled to speak on that day. He was not scheduled to be in prominence in that day. He was a great guy, but this was one of those fortuitous moments where one man was picked out of the crowd to be the leader of a movement. And I think this is probably, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it right now. You never know when it is your time. You just don't know. And for us as a people, Martin Luther King's time was that day on the march on Washington, D.C. 200,000 people were there. And a speaker was not who was going to speak, couldn't speak. Hey, send Martin up there. He's a good guy, he's a charismatic guy, and he came up and he gave that I Have a Dream speech. And after that, he was launched into prominence. He led a movement. He staged boycotts. He had the things that Martin Luther King did, and I'm getting goosebumps even as I'm speaking about it right now. The things that Martin Luther King created, was a part of, launched a movement in the United States that had been needed, continues to move on to this day. He inspired a generation of civil rights advocates and civil rights people because he took up the mantle. I want to harken back to Billy Graham. Billy Graham, many of you know who Billy Graham is. He was an evangelist. And there is a saying that said that Billy Graham was not God's first choice to be the greatest evangelist the world has ever known. He was the guy who said yes. Martin Luther King may not have been God's first choice to be the greatest civil rights activist on the planet. He was the guy who said yes. And I think if you get nothing else out of what we're going to talk about today, that you get this. That Martin Luther King said yes. And in order for you to be successful, in order for you to move forward in life, you got to say yes. Let me start this early, folks. You can kind of get me started. That's good stuff. Let's talk about some leadership principles or leadership lessons that we can learn from Martin Luther King. Number one, and I'm taking this from an article that was actually just put out last year by her name is Frances Bridges, and she's a contributor. I believe this was Forbes magazine who brought this out, but it's a great article. I think it's pretty cool. Number one, summon your courage. Martin Luther King, as the article says, took up the leadership mantle in the civil rights movement, knowing it would be met with violence and resistance. They took up the mantle of being the civil rights leader back in the 60s. Now, you got to understand this. During that time, there was not only resistance to civil rights or anybody standing up for civil, there was just a resistance to black people across America. And no greater fear could be welled up in people of color coming out of the 50s. We're talking about white lunch counters. We're talking about white drinking fountains, black drinking fountains, segregated schools. We're talking about all those things that we saw during the 50s and early 60s. Now, I was born in 61. And I recall, even as a child, marching, and I was really young. I mean, we're talking about 7, 8 years old. I mean, I could remember it very, very well, as a matter of fact, that we were marching down the roads saying, you'll live, right, left, Ungawa, Black Power, that kind of stuff. And that's what we sang those songs when I was a kid. So I'm very well acquainted with what racism looked like in America. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Martin Luther King, who was part of a movement? He was a young man at the time, so it wasn't like he was an old guy who had seen many, many years. He's still a young guy who said, you know what, I'm going to join this movement knowing that we're going to see some resistance. But he had to summon that courage. We don't, in those days, it wasn't as though you had social media and you could, hide behind your keyboard and just go ahead and type whatever you wanted to type and you were anonymous. If you were going to stand out in a crowd, folks, during those days, you were going to stand out. And not only was there going to be retaliation, there was going to be retaliation. The KKK was still very prevalent in this country during the 60s. Gangs and mobs of people who would come to your home was a reality in those days. And yet Martin Luther King said, you know what, I'm going to stand up and be a symbol for civil rights in this country. That's huge. I mean, that is just huge in a nation. And we've come so far. I mean, we've just come so far as a country. Not only that, but number two, he told the truth unarmed. And so there are people who talk about this today. They say there are Martin Luther King people, and then there are Malcolm X type people. Malcolm X type people, they'll get up with a gun, they'll get up with a bat, club, they'll fight for their rights, they'll get their fists up and they'll fight you. Martin Luther King said, no, I'm learning. I can get the truth out without doing any of those things. I will do it unarmed. We will show civil disobedience, because at that time it was still segregation, was still a law. He will do it unarmed. I'll read something to you. In his acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, King said he grappled with how he could accept the prize on behalf of a movement that was still engaged in an unrelenting struggle, a struggle that had not yet been won and had not won the peace. That was the essence of the prize, because he was getting a Nobel Peace Prize for something that had not happened yet. But he came to the conclusion that the award was for the non-violent response to harrowing violence and oppression, and said, I accept this award. This is Martin Luther King saying this. I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America. He said he had an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. So this is interesting, and this kind of goes against what we're hearing as a nation today. Martin Luther King, back in 1964, upon receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, was struggling with this thought. He's going, you know what? How can I accept this? The Nobel Peace Prize is for peace. We don't want peace. And the people who are giving out the Peace Prize said, no, that's not why we're giving this to you. We're giving it to you because you are going about it without taking up arms. You are seeking peace. You are seeking your rights. You're seeking, equality, not through putting up your hands and trying to beat somebody into believing. So that doesn't work, folks. I just don't. I've learned in my nearly 60 years of being on this planet, you cannot legislate morality. You cannot legislate equality. You cannot legislate people accepting you. You have to do it by your actions. You have to do it by the things that you do. It doesn't matter how many laws that are passed to try to bring equality in this country. It will not happen based upon that. Michael Jordan is not the best basketball player and recognized as the greatest basketball player ever. And I mean, even you LeBron James fans, I will differ. We'll just agree to differ in our opinions. Michael Jordan is recognized as the greatest basketball player because of what he does. Not because he's black or white. It's because of what he does. And that, you cannot argue with that. That's absolutely. Usain Bolt is not recognized as the fastest human on the planet because they made some law. He is the fastest man on the planet because he kicked butt and just outran everybody. You cannot argue with that. Martin Luther King says, look, we are going to achieve equality. Civil rights legislation will be passed. Things will change, not because I'm going to beat somebody over the head. Violence. Not an MLK, or not a Malcolm X way of doing things. We're going to do it unarmed, nonviolent. The world will see what we are about in this right. And that's the difference. That's why he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He did it with unarmed truth. Number 3, he got comfortable. As a leader, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You've got to be comfortable with being just uncomfortable. John Lewis, who just passed away recently, congressman from Georgia, former chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, wrote a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King for Time and wrote about Dr. King, encouraged him, that made John Lewis, and you probably remember this, where John Lewis said, good trouble. There is a time for good trouble. When you see something wrong, you say something. When you see a wrong being done upon somebody, you don't just sit back. You say something. That's called good trouble. You don't just make trouble to make trouble. Okay, there's a lot of people who make trouble to make trouble. But there is a time, and Martin Luther King said this. He said, look, there is a time for good trouble. And John Lewis echoed that his entire life, where he told that to his staff. His whole staff would say stuff like that. They would say, hey, this is one of those sayings that you talk about, is good trouble. And it went across, and it went against the grain of what people say today. Don't get in trouble. Don't say anything. Don't speak up. You have to speak up. That's what we call good trouble. And yes, there will probably be a price to pay for that. But that's what they call good trouble. There's a time for that. Don't just sit back and watch those things happen. Let's go on to another one because we've got a lot of stuff to go. Be optimistic, eternally optimistic. Once again, we go back to that Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech by Dr. King. And he explained that the foundation of civil rights movement and his personal commitment is to get grounded in optimism. I accept this award today, he said, with an abiding faith in America, an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept the view that mankind, this is Martin Luther King saying this, is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. He was in a top. This man, now this is the interesting thing about it. We have people today who just say, that's it, America's terrible, it's a terrible country, it'll never be anything, blah, blah, blah. And we live in 2021, where we've put a man on the moon, we've seen all kinds of great things happen in this country and around the world. And yet, back in 1964, at the height of, other than when blacks were enslaved, we went through like 100 years of Jim Crow, of segregation, of poll taxes, all those things, the KKK. Martin Luther King stood forward and he said, I am eternally optimistic about America. I've got an audacious faith. I'm going to read this to you. He says, I have an audacious faith in the future. You have to have an audacious faith that things are going to get better. They're always going to get better. Yeah, things are going bad right now, okay? Racially in this country, things are not where we want them to be at. But guess what? Martin Luther King in 1964 said, I got faith, guys, that America is going to be that land. It will see that land. It won't be that land, though, if you sit back and you just kind of go, nah, it's not going to be that way, and you're just pissed off all the time. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have an audacious faith in this country. These aren't my words, folks. These are the words of Martin Luther King, the man whose birthday we celebrate today, the greatest civil rights leader of our generation, he said, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, I accept this award today, I'll read it again, with an abiding faith in America. An abiding faith in America. An audacious faith in the future of mankind. There's a biblical verse that says that no man knows the day nor the hour. No, there's no man who can even tell you if he's going to live tomorrow. You have to believe that there's a God above that has a plan for your life, and not only has a plan for your life, but has a plan for the future of America, and that future is bright no matter what anybody tells you. There's great things ahead of us. But you can't sit back and listen to people who go, oh, woe is me, oh, life sucks, America sucks, it's a racist country. Well, Martin Luther King didn't say that. He says we're going through a time. There's always periods in every country, in every continent. There is not a continent on this planet where racism, subjugation, segregation, evil did not prevail for a time. Not one. There's not a continent. There is not a nation where somebody didn't come in and displace a people that were there already. America is no different than any other country. You know, contrary to popular belief, America is not that unique. The Vikings did it. The Romans did it. The English did it. The Spanish did it. The Dutch did it. The Portuguese did it. The Hispanics did it. The Mexicans did it. All of these people came into land and they displaced the people that were there. And yet we focus upon America and we say, America, you're unique because because we have nobody else to blame at this point. But Martin Luther King said something very interesting. He says he has an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. That's powerful. I take Martin Luther King's words at face value. Let's go on, okay, folks. We've got a couple of things. We're going to talk about some leadership principles that Martin Luther King exemplified, and I think you're going to get something out of these last principles. Lead by character. Oh, sorry about that. I'm getting this light blindness on my camera here, and we can't have that, folks. Let's do this. Here, I'm going to do something, folks. There we go. All right, because I had this light that was hitting my camera. Lead by character. Harvard Business Review interviewed Bill George, former fellow at Harvard Business School, expert on Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, what is the most applicable lesson to leaders today about Dr. King? And part of his response was to value the process. Value how things are done as much as the results you aim to achieve. In a very real sense, the character of you demonstrates the character you demonstrate in achieving your purpose is the legacy you leave to those leaders coming along behind you. So what he's basically saying is that during the whole process of achieving civil rights, Martin Luther King trusted the process. He didn't just get upset and then go out and be vengeful and do all kinds of crazy things. He had character, and people saw that. They said, this guy's not, getting all upset and going crazy over, a setback or something like that. He followed the process. The process was a legal and a humanitarian process where he showed nonviolently that he was right, that the cause was right, and people saw that. One of the biggest reasons why the civil rights movement broke through was especially during the Edmund Pettus Bridge moment, when the nation was able to see not just black people, but black people, white people, pastors, children, all being trampled upon during that event. And the nation was horrified. Horrified. So it's one thing to say, you beat up some black folks. Okay, you didn't see that though. Okay, you didn't see it on the news. You didn't see it, you saw maybe a picture of it on, in the newspaper. But when the cameras were rolling and you saw row after row after row of people being trampled, being knocked down, and it was on American soil, and how could the nation sit by and go, yay? These were Americans. These were pastors. These were children. These were women who were just saying, I want my rights. I'm an American. And as a result of that, the nation was horrified. It was the process. The process of change can sometimes be very violent. It can be very just heartbreaking. But you can't reach out and become violent and become vindictive, because people will look at you and they'll go, see, you deserve it. And that doesn't advance your cause. Number 2. Let's go on to a few more. I've got just maybe one or two more. Empower the powerless. Leaders empower the powerless. In your organization, and this is what Dr. Martin Luther King did. He empowered his people to do the work. No organization is generally built by one guy. It's generally a bunch of people who collectively create a movement. And the civil rights movement was just that. Every state had a small group of people that collectively created a movement. Those people by themselves were powerless, but they were empowered by King, his movement, and other people who said you can do it. And that's the only way you're going to grow your organization too, is by empowering the powerless. A great. Okay, the last one. Finding the opportunity in every situation. And let's talk about Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, many of you know who she was. She was the first black female elected as a member of Congress in '69. She represented New York's 12th congressional district, serving the Bed-Stuy neighborhood in Brooklyn. Well, when she got to Congress, what did they do? Well, they put her over, of all things, they put her over, they assigned her to the House Agricultural Committee. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but there's not a lot of farms in Bed-Stuy, in that 12th congressional district. There's no real need for an expertise in agriculture in that area. It was an effort, basically, to get her out of the way. Yes, we'll get you into Congress, but get out of the way because we got things to do. So sit in the corner. This is what happened, though. This is very interesting. Shirley Chisholm was encouraged to take advantage of the situation of being a part of the Farm Bureau, and this is what she did. She didn't just go sit there in a corner and go, this doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to do anything about it. This is what she did. She worked with representatives from Middle America. This is very cool. Who served struggling farmers to expand the food stamp program. This provided vital assistance for urban constituents like Chisholm's in that 12th district in Bed-Stuy, while also benefiting the country's farmers. She's taking advantage of a situation. Furthermore, she drove the creation of the Women, Infant, and Children, or WIC program, which gives nutritious food to underprivileged women and children. Even though colleagues had tried to obstruct her and her influence, Chisholm found the opportunity in her imperfect situation. You've got to do the same thing. You find yourself in an imperfect situation, folks. Don't just sit there and take it. Use that situation. Find a way to use that situation for your good. Always look for the good in a situation. Always look for an advantage in a situation. Every situation has a benefit. Whether you see it readily or not, you have to look for it, though. And that's the important part about it. Folks, we're done. This is Sherman Ray, Black Success Magazine. I put the wrong thing up. I did it again. This is Sherman Ray, Black Business Chamber, or the Black Success Magazine. I want to thank you all for being a part of the show today. We will be back again tomorrow, 8:30 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time for Black Success Magazine. Enjoy this MLK Day, folks. Go out and be proud of the man who created a movement, who changed America. And we can learn so many lessons from him. It's been Sherman Ray, Black Success Magazine podcast. We'll see you again tomorrow.